The disappearing Louisiana coast is a multi-pronged threat that the people of Louisiana are fighting. This WYES podcast looks into how the scope of coastal loss was recognized, who began sounding alarms, and then started developing a strategy to save the coast and a way of life. The Louisiana coast is changing, slipping away to erosion, subsidence, sea level rise. Decades ago, the threat was recognized and a focus on saving the coast evolved. In this podcast, we'll remember those who sounded the early warnings and began the battle to save our coast. Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh, WYES Community Projects producer. Thanks for joining us as we continue our podcast Early Warnings about the beginnings of the fight to save the disappearing Louisiana coast. In order to initiate policy and secure funding to restore the coast, the public needed to be on board. That's what we will talk about in this episode, creating public awareness about coastal loss. And joining me are Steve Mathies, a coastal consultant with STANTEC, who is also our co-producer and host of our podcast, and who has also held leadership roles with coastal restoration agencies. Windell, Curole, retired director of the South Lafourche Levee District, and always out there telling us about the need to save our coast. Cathy Penland, former attorney and also land manager for the Wisner Land Trust, and Dr. Robert Thomas, director of the Center for Environmental Communication at Loyola University, New Orleans. He also teaches at Loyola's Biological Sciences and Environment program and served as the founding director of the Louisiana Nature Center. Thanks, guys, for being here for this discussion, which I know is going to be a great one. Steve, in our first episode, we talked about just, this people in our area starting to recognize the fact that we were having a problem with coastal loss. In those earlier days, and you were involved in some of the earlier days, when did it become also really you aware of the fact that the public didn't know enough about this and we needed to get them informed?
Well, and as I told you before, the way I would visit the coast as a kid from being a farmer, and we'd visit the coast and we'd go fishing, and we didn't really, it looked like it was so vast. There was so much. You could never exhaust that. And so then when I came back and started working for the Corps, there became that this would have been in the early 80s, and there'd already been, alarm bells going off in the 70s that, we have a coastal land loss problem. But I think most people who live there even, they could see the issue, but I'm not really sure they understood what caused the issue or what it looked like long term. And so it was an effort to get people engaged and talk to people. The people that were most knowledgeable, though, really were the people that were on the ground. The fishermen knew, they knew what was going on a daily basis. And so, we think about everybody, today we sort of know about it, but this was at a time where even the smartest political minds and lobbyists would tell you coastal land loss will never become a statewide issue in Louisiana. You will never get people in North Louisiana to understand the value of the coast. And I'll go back to say, if you have the old, Soil Conservation Service soils maps of Terrebonne Parish, across Terrebonne Marsh, it was written wasteland. So that was the perspective back then. So today we're really fortunate with having you guys here because y'all really have three different perspectives. Windell, you grew up there as a fisheries agent and then with the Levee Board, how people that live there really kind of engaged with, we have a crisis and it impacts me. Okay, and then Cathy, of course, with you, you're the person that managed land that was being lost, and you didn't come to the issue early on. You came to the issue when you realized that there was a problem. And of course, Bob, you've been there, you've seen what it takes with citizens to start, how that all started. So really, this is a discussion about, how did you see it yourself, and who were the other individuals that helped you with this realization we have a crisis, and what do we need to do going forward, okay? And I think that's kind of what our discussion is today.
Right, and so Windell, let's kick that off with you. You grew up in it. You saw, you
was
sort
born
of started seeing it and experiencing it. You know, the people around you, were they sensing it too?
Well, I was born in 1951, and at that time, there wasn't the loss was not very much and very fast. But the big issue is, you know, and all of us have gone to Grand Isle. Everybody in Southeast Louisiana, you know, you come down LA1, and then you get on that bridge and you look toward Grand Isle. And I can remember as a kid, I'm getting 5, 6 years old, looking over there and seeing mostly maybe 90% marsh and 10% water. Today, it's flipped over 90% water. And a lot of that took place, some of the fastest loss was like in the 70s, but you could still see things taking place. What really, I remember I was in college, biology major, and I was doing some type of research, Woody Gagliano, one of the first studies, I think he showed 12 miles of coastal land loss. Now, we have this gigantic coast to coast. There is no wetlands in the United States like what we have, okay? So you were losing 12 miles coast to coast, but you know, you didn't notice that number. But at the same time, in 1973, I'm still in college, and we have an aquatic biology club, and we have a geologist come and speak. And in 73, we had one of the record years for the Mississippi River, for flooding, okay? And he came and he explained how South Louisiana was built by the Mississippi River changing course over the last 5,000 years, you know? And when he told that story, I said, how could I be 18, 19 years old and not know how the land that I lived on was formed? And once you know that story, you know the risk and you know what you can do to try to keep it going. But just that idea that this river, which drains 41% of the United States, from western New York to Canada to Montana, every drop of water that falls can end up passing right by me by Lafourche or right here past the river. And those sediments, when it's a flood, you know that river's coming down, and when it's at flood stage, it's chocolate because it's got so much sediment coming in. But the land was built before we were here. The floods would happen. The water would get over the natural levee, but as it would slow down, the majority of the fat clays and sands would fall out first, and then the rest of the materials would go to the back and make the back marsh. But that's why we have this unique, and I didn't realize it until I went to some national organizations about flooding. They said, why you almost want to flood, you're building right near the water. Well, I said, no, you idiots, the high land is near the water because it's built by flooding, okay? So we build on the land next to the waterway. And so learning that river changed course was the other big deal. You know, about maybe 1,000 years ago, the main flow was in by Lafourche. Before that, by Utesh. Before that, to the east, and it's in the present course. So if you look, time-lapse photography, the last 5,000 years, if we had South Louisiana picture, you'd see the Mississippi River moving back and forth across South Louisiana and not just putting out water, putting out the land that we live on. And the best example of that right now is in Atchafalaya Bay. The Grand Bayou in the Atchafalaya Basin has filled in. Atchafalaya Bay is filling in, and it's filling in tremendously fast. So we know exactly, but that's the one place it's building. We got Neptune Pass. But that's the whole reason why we talk about using that. And so learning that, I said, the rest of my life, I've done emergency management, I've done coastal restoration, I've built levees. And every time I would talk and give a presentation, I would always start with explaining what South Louisiana was built. Because if you understand that, you understand the risk and why it's so big.
And so then you describe to us, when did you start realizing we had a problem, that we were losing what had been built over all those thousands of years?
Well, you could start seeing the openings like when I got to high school, going to Grand Isle, and you started seeing that. But it really expanded tremendously fast in the 70s. But just at the same time that the environmental movement started and some of the research papers that came out in the late 60s and 70s, man, this is the reason for the problem, and we do have a problem. And so that's when it really started to people started in our area to know about it. Now, I later became a Sea Grant agent in 1976, and our job was to educate people about what was not wasteful, that marsh. And that's when I started saying, look, guys, all that shrimp and crabs and fish, your best fishing areas are there because the marsh provides it. Just like a pasture takes the sunlight and turns it into grass for the cows to grow. that the marsh grass takes that sunlight and turns it not only to food, but actually the homes that these estuarine species, shrimp, crabs, fish that we love so much. So all that is based on that. So if you don't take care of that, less marsh, less all the food. And the group that, with me, back with the Sea Grant program, were avid hunters and fishermen. And we were seeing the places that we used to fish, the little point you used to fish at, no longer there. And then in the 1970s, we started to lose as much as 70 square miles a year.
Yeah.
It's tapered down because we eroded the easy stuff. There's just the remnant's still there. It's a skeleton of what it used to be.
So alarm bells are ringing. You're on the radio talking about that. Cathy, let's go over to you and talk to you about, you were land manager for the Wisner Land Trust. What exactly does that mean? What is the Wisner Land Trust? And then also just your personal involvement regarding coastal restoration.
The Land Trust was property donated to the city of New Orleans in 1914. It has since, as per the courts, reverted back to the city and is kind of in flux and litigation right now. But I became the manager in 1992, and it's about 50,000 acres in South Louisiana and 3 parishes. The largest tract of land is in Lower Lafourche Parish. And revenue for the trust came from oil and gas, primarily the Levee field, the Bay Marchand field. 2 of the oldest oil and gas fields in Louisiana were both on Wisner property, as well as the Loop Corridor for the Louisiana offshore oil port, which brings oil into the United States. I started the job as a girl born and raised in New Orleans who had been in the oil and gas business, but I knew very little about coastal land loss. I was kind of a city girl. And when I got the job, I went to the courthouses and looked up all the agreements that dealt with the property, and then decided to take a map and go down and look at the property. And I was on the top of the Levee Bridge, and the bridge was up, so my car was stopped, and I got out of the car and looked at my map and looked at the area of land that I would be managing, and it was almost all water.
No water, amazing.
And then learned through meeting many people and through great educators like my late husband, Shay Penland, Denise Reed, so many people that I met, including Windell and people with the Greater Lafourche Port Commission, which is located on Wisner property. I really learned about how alarming it was that the coastline there is actually the Caminata, it's called the Caminata Headlands. It's probably one of the most rapidly eroding barrier shorelines. It's a barrier shoreline in the world. And coastal restoration projects were constantly being proposed by QIPRA, and we did some community-based projects, which were really, really successful as well on the property.
So you mentioned your husband, your late husband, Shay Penland. I can remember him really being out there before cameras talking about this issue.
Yes.
What were you hearing from him?
Everything. But he was a great educator. He was a really, really great educator and so knowledgeable. And he was out there doing beach profiles in the late 70s on Fouchon Beach, long before I met him. And the University of Aberdeen in Scotland, there was a guy named Dr. Bill Fritchie who was doing a lot of work with him out there. And they were doing beach profiles and a lot of the research that was done out there to determine what was going on that piece of property it was done by him.
So Cathy, I have a question. You mentioned a story earlier about when you noticed the erosion on the shoreline with the oil.
Right,
Yeah,
right. When I first started my job, I was probably about 2 months into it. I got a call from Kerry St. Pé, and he told me that he was with DEQ at the time, and he told me that there was a sheen on the Gulf of Mexico off of the Wisner property, and they wanted to investigate and find out what was causing it. And so I drove down there, and we had a bunch of people on the beach, and what we discovered was that old abandoned oil pits that had been used by Chevron years and years ago had been abandoned They'd been unlined. They'd been abandoned by just putting sand over the top of them. And most of these were east of Bay Champagne, not where the facilities were on Bay Marchand. And the shoreline had eroded into these buried pits, resulting in a sheen on the Gulf of Mexico. Eventually, Chevron, they were very responsible and spent a lot of money cleaning up the area, but they had to sheet pile off the Gulf of Mexico to clean up this area. Do you remember that?
I remember that, yeah. The sheet
It was
pile, yeah.
amazing. It was amazing.
Amazing is right. Bob, I know you were involved also in this old coastal restoration issue from decades ago. And so why don't you describe to us, I mean, how you got involved, why it concerned you, and also what was the effort in trying to make other people aware of the fact that we were having this issue?
Yeah. Well, I came on the scene at the right moment, and that's how I really got seriously involved. But when I was an undergraduate at then USL, I took a wetlands course from two of the greats, Johnny Lynch and Jake Valentine, both with the Fish and Wildlife Service. They had offices in the biology department, and it was a totally different story, because they did talk about issues like this, but mostly they were talking about the wealth and the values and how important it was to the coast in so many ways, sociologically, ecologically, economically, and everything else. And so then I went off to graduate school, and when I came back, I was lucky enough to become the founding director of the Louisiana Nature Center. And immediately everybody said, well, what are y'all going to do? What are you going to talk about? And I said, well, we're going to talk about birds and snakes and things like that. I said, but we're going to get deeper than that. And so I went around to all the universities, and I talked to the scientists, especially the ecologists in those universities. And I said, so what should we be focusing on with the Nature Center? And when I explained what we were going to do to the general public across the board, telling stories, not blaming anybody, just what's going on out there, how do we solve it? They all said wetlands. We're losing wetlands. Now, this was 1978. Wow. And we first got our numbers. Now, we knew things were happening during the early 70s and late 60s, but the USGS topo maps were updated from 1956 to 1978. And when those hit the ground, everybody went, oh my gosh. It's like Windell was talking about, places that when you look on those maps that show all this vegetated wetlands, suddenly were blue. They were open water in just that short period of time. So we do know, we all recognize, and we've already said it, that the late 70s were a real period of the demise of the wetlands. But our Nature Center opened in 1980 with a major exhibit on coastal land loss in Louisiana. As far as I know, it was the first public exhibit of its kind. And we went from there. And we lit, everything we did was focused on coastal wetlands, their ecology, their values, and part of our, like I said, sociological values, cultural values. And we just kept pressing it. I started almost immediately teaching a course at UNO on Delta ecology, which I still teach at Loyola. It's been 45 years or more. And just a host of people coming in, because everybody wants to know about it and they want to kind of understand it. But people that are not curious, that are not touching it, don't understand how it touches every life in this state, in this nation, in this world. So it's really a fascinating thing.
Well, yeah, that issue, we know, let's get even past the fisheries, which to me it's tremendously big because all of our communities, we were down there because of fisheries, all right? But it was obvious, and I started telling people, look, the Gulf of Mexico is 30 miles closer to everybody in South Louisiana.
Yeah.
Okay, just that simple fact to wake up. You don't have to like fish, you don't have to want to eat, but the place you work, the place you play, is more threatened from the Gulf of Mexico from water, and more of South Louisiana is turning into Gulf of Mexico, and it's less and less of Louisiana, the marshes and the ridges that we had. And again, the science was built up very well in the 60s and early 70s. And by the 80s, you had the truth of what's going on. The local people, and that's what the three guys that I based all of my knowledge and how I worked. Woody Gagliano, and when I read that first report, he was willing to talk to me. I'd call him. Shea Penland, okay? And then Roy Dock when he came later with GPS elevations. Those three guys, the information that they had, and man, they were always, in fact, the last time I saw Shea, I was walking into WWL to give a report after he gave a little report, all right? But those three guys, they knew the WYES, but they always wanted to match what was on the ground and what the people on the ground were saying. So basically, the people who had been fishermen for years, they knew what was going on, but they didn't know why.
Right.
The people doing the research started figuring out why, but they didn't know all the whats. But when you put that information together, you got the best truth about what was going on. And the way you win these types of things, when you start talking about things that people are seeing, you get that bridge of education open. Whenever you're dealing with a crowd, when you can say something that they don't think you know, that you know, it opens that. And really, it was the 80s when that information started being picked up by people, that it wasn't there before. And I remember there was a representative from New Orleans that really got on it, but it didn't move. It wasn't until the late 80s, and again, the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana played a good part in getting that out. But I was a Sea Grant agent in '76, and our job was, number one job is to educate people about the marshes and how all of our fisheries are based on that. Alligators came back, the eagles came back. So even though we had lost from bad management, lost some species, as long as you had that marsh there, you could bring those animals back. But as you lost the marsh, there's a less chance of getting those things back.
And so were people getting this message? I mean, you all were putting the message out.
Well, and I'm just going to back up just a little bit because, I mean, when we start talking about coastal land loss, it's not like this is a new message, okay? We all know that the reason that we had the Louisiana Purchase was because of the Mississippi River, right? Because it was so important. Sure. And then we knew with that article in the National Geographic at the turn of the century that we knew that if we leveed the Mississippi River, that Louisiana wetlands would deteriorate in 2 to 3 generations in the future, right? So, and there was a big controversy. We don't want to do that, or do we do it, or do we not do it? And then after the flood of 1927, the decision was made to levee the river, okay? Now, if you jump forward 2 or 3 generations, which is right now, we knew that coastal land loss in Louisiana would happen and we would collapse, okay? But the wisdom at the time was if you levied the river, there would be such economic benefits in the country that we have plenty of time to address this future problem.
Sure.
So we've known about it, we've sort of known about it, but there wasn't this urgency until it actually happened.
Well, actually, the law said, look, we're going to make sure for navigation because it's so economically important, the economic nerve. In fact, that's some education we need to do. The rest of the country needs to know the economic importance of the Mississippi River. So that was a major thing. And the other major thing was to reduce the flooding. The third thing we didn't do was how do you maintain the environment? Percy V. Oscar, you don't have to wait, he was there telling people, look, guys, you can do all those things, but at least make a few breaks in that levee so your marshes can be maintained. He says, it's like giving a heart attack to the heart. It's like the vessels that you have necessary to get the flow of blood. We stopped the nutrients that needed to go into sediments. Percy V. Oscar knew it, and he was at a good position, but nobody cared. It wasn't until, like I said, the late 80s, the public got involved. But the laws were about navigation and it was about flood protection, and they forgot about the need for the environment. And every community, this is one thing in Oregon, doing our work that we be more successful with, is understand every community needs those 3 things. They need an economy, they need basic infrastructure, and you need a good environment. And to play on just one of those things hurts our communities. That's why our people always, I call it practical environmentalism. We never talk about just doing environmental projects without thinking about businesses and not thinking about flood protection and other infrastructure. And that's a critical thing that I think we can all do better if we don't not be a one-trick pony.
And I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No,
and yet, with economic gains, there are sacrifices. Mr. Go being an unbelievable example of that, and then the oil and gas industry. I mean, the Leeville field was crisscrossed by canals, and it's gone. And more recent studies have indicated it's not just the direct land loss of dredging the canals, but also there's subsidence, additional subsidence as a result of the extraction of the
Absolutely, but the thing is, all of those things either get minimized or healed had we managed the river
Right.
for the third leg that we needed to do. Nobody cared about, and truly, nobody cared about the environment. The 30s, think about that,
Yeah.
Depression, that is so far away from what people were thinking about.
So, Bob, you hit on
was so
something.
vast.
This awareness sort of came in with the environmental movement too. So, what did people start doing? Would you say? Would they start organizing, or did they start making? I'm talking about the general public here. Were they making their concerns known?
Well, they were, and of course we spent a lot of time talking about it to everybody you can imagine. I mean, the group here and others, and I used to say that anytime there was a meeting of old boogs, I was going to be there talking to them about wetland loss, and it was always an old guy in the back room, old like we are now.
That's right.
But some guy would raise his hand and he'd say, yeah, well, when I was young, and he would tell a story about a place he used to go that's been open water
Yeah.
the second half of his life. And when he would do that, heads would start nodding and everybody would talk. And anything we did publicly, it happened that way. And I want to say something about MRGO, because when Kevin McCaffrey and I were doing our documentary on the MRGO, what we found from the old boogs, again, my favorite audience, but they would tell us, they say, oh no, when they came down here and told us they were going to build this, both sides of that canal were going to be lined with businesses, and there was going to be jobs and prosperity for everybody, and on and on and on. And this was after it was obvious that it was going to go away at some point. But all of those things happened. But what did happen, the biggest response was several environmental groups got started. And they were wise enough, like the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana, was wise enough not just to put a bunch of people who really, really cared about the environment and just focused on it, but that board had business people, mothers, teachers, corporate people, bankers. All of these people came together and met frequently to build the organization, and that's when it really got started, that they were starting to communicate. We even did, Steve and I were talking a while ago, that I remember doing these interfaith stewardship workshops where we would go from church to church to church of different denominations and talk about the issue and sell it in terms of stewardship of God's gift. And I mean, we tried everything we could to get it out, and it really started to spread rapidly. And our problem today is that we just have, we've never run out of steam, we've never run out of ideas. Our knowledge is tremendous now. We have the science down pat, but there just seems to be interference that comes in and says, no, we're not going to spend our money there. We've got a better idea.
Well, I can tell you that I gave a talk to the Levee Board Association. All right, at that time in 1980, I started working for the South Lafourche Levee District. And so I gave a talk at the association meeting, and I introduced them the facts and the science about what's going on in coastal Louisiana. And on the way going back home, I'm riding with the board president, and he says, some people ask if you are communist. No, I'm serious. So that's really the idea of that. It's the Sierra Club. It's the guy. And what we were trying to show is that, no, the regular guys that like to hunt and fish, we're the biggest proponents of taking care of coastal Louisiana.
And they were seeing firsthand too how it was disappearing.
Yeah, they were, but when we talked about it, and I remember now by the late 80s, I remember someone from the Levee Board Association saying, Wendell, you were the first one to tell us about that. The late 80s, we finally, the public started to catch on.
Started
But again,
hearing it.
the stuff that y'all did, Channel 4, I remember doing a program back in 1982, thousands of ducks in South Lafourche on the east side of the bayou. And we were right there in the springtime when the ducks were coming back. And it was a great visual. And right now, we have the ducks are a fraction, a tenth of what we used to have because the marsh is no longer there.
Right.
The change that took place.
But Wendell, back then, the people back then, do you think that they weren't knowledgeable about coastal, they weren't knowledgeable about the functions. They didn't really say, well, we really don't care about this, right? it was their culture, it was their livelihood, it was where they lived, and I think that maybe they didn't realize what the value of those wetlands for storm surge protection until after Katrina. Because if you think, with Hurricane Betsy, we had a similar path, okay, and similar velocity and every intensity, but we didn't have nearly the damage because we had that 20 to 30 miles of contiguous wetlands,
Right.
okay? And we always talked about that storm as a storm of a lifetime if you grew up here.
Oh, yeah,
We thought
Betsy
that
was,
was it, right? We weren't going to see it again, so we always thought we had time. But I think that with Katrina, we realized that time has run out now, and we're seeing all this. So there is a different urgency now, post-Katrina, than we had before Katrina.
Yeah,
Don't you think?
again, this is the whole thing. We got a complex issue. I'm thinking, you look at how South Louisiana was built. So we don't have just the problem of the sea eroding into the coast. The coast is subsiding. We live on a subsiding delta, okay? So those issues, whether we lose the marsh or not, we're more flood prone, okay? And it's just the subsidence issue that we've stopped the system that built the land where it is. And we've had to make some decisions. And with Barataria-Terrebonne, it was all that discussion. And by that time, when I was in '92 when it first started.
Right. No, it was late '80s and early '90s.
Yeah, but we would talk about it, and I was saying, look, if we're going to get the best out of South Louisiana, we need to maintain the marsh, but we need to protect where people live. And at that time, it was more of an environmental organization. You sit around and everybody said, "Idea, we need to look at this issue, this issue." Well, I'm saying levees are an issue, and they wouldn't put it up because levees we lose marsh because of levees. Well, not all the time, but the river levees, yes. The hurricane levees, not so much. But the point is, they would not put it up. And I was there for like 7 years. I'm saying, look, I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I'm saying it's an issue. Part of the reason, flood protection and restoration are the opposite sides of the same coin. And I would tell people, so you don't want to provide a levee. So let me ask you this. How many acres of marsh would have to be built to have 3 feet of water go through your house? Well, 0. You're not going to win that side if you don't think about dealing when you have these projects. Perfect example was introduction of fresh water to Bayou Lafourche. Bayou Lafourche had been blocked from the Mississippi River in 1903, had some tremendous environmental damage in South Lafourche from that. We're going to start putting more water in, but not just for environmental reasons, but also for drinking water. We had Hurricane Andrew, had a bunch of organics fall into the bayou, and the drinking water was terrible. So we're going to move more water. State's going to do it. Everybody, all right, a good idea. We're getting more water coming down Bayou Lafourche. Well, the state comes down, and I remember the first meeting was at Rose Cutoff Middle School. And they said, all right, we're going to go ahead and get 2,000 cubic feet per second, and it's going to raise the bayou 4 feet. And they kept on talking. And they didn't tell people how they weren't going to flood them with that 4 feet. So the second one, Caldwell was the department head, natural resources. We were walking into the meeting in Thibodeau now. That's the second public meeting. He says, we're going to get this project built. I said, what's the deal? I get up there. 92 people were up there talking, only 2 of us supporting the project because they didn't explain to people how they weren't going to flood them. So that was in the early 90s. Yeah. I was actually on the freshwater board when we finally got some construction going. We got past 250 cubic feet per second. It's doing 500 and we'll be getting up to 1,000. It delayed it 20 years, okay? And I think, and why did that happen? Because they didn't explain to the people. When you got big projects, again, everything cuts in every direction. There's always some bad. Somebody suffers for any big project, but no matter how good, you have some negatives. So you got to go out and really explain it. And I see the same problem that happened with the diversion. There wasn't that the people supporting it just thought, well, yeah, sure, everybody support it. But when you start looking what it's going to do, there'll be some negative effects. All you got to do is mitigate those negative effects, and you can get stuff done.
So people understanding is really, really important.
It's critical, and it's complicated.
It's beyond just awareness. It's really understanding what's going on.
Sure. Yeah, and you talk about getting the low-hanging fruit. Well, really, what makes it really tough is that you got to get the ripe fruit. Okay, it's not about the low-hanging sometimes.
But Wendell, that's a good point because I think most people, to receive that information, they have to receive it from someone that they trust.
Exactly,
Right.
all the time.
And so if you, if you're hearing it from someone you don't trust the information. And so figuring out how we put this together where it's not, it's not slanted one way or the other. It's just the bare truth.
Exactly.
And we can make a decision. We can make a decision that we can give up coastal Louisiana and we're all going to move out of here, right? We can make that political decision.
Well, and we are moving out. That's the other thing. People, it's hit you in the side of the head like 2x4. So, people are moving out. It's gotten, as Steve was talking about, it's gotten worse because of the flood insurance issue.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, or all insurances, in fact.
Yeah.
But it's the movement because of the risk that's taking place. But the thing is, we have the science. We know so much more about things that we can be intelligent about how we do it.
When I started with Wisner in '92, we had, I think, about 220 pleasure camps, mostly only accessible by boat on Wisner property.
Yeah.
I recently met with someone who's involved now, and she said that I think there are only 40 functional camps now. 40 camps standing, and maybe only 20 of them are functional. The rest of them have been abandoned.
Yeah.
So that when you talk about retreat, that's a retreat, and it wasn't a big money maker, but it was a part of the culture down there that is gone.
Look, food was always better at the camp.
Yeah.
Because it was alive an hour ago, and you cleaned it,
yeah.
you cooked it. You can't get better food than food camp.
But we always talked about that, what you just said, because if you ever wanted to sell the value of coastal Louisiana to someone that's not from coastal Louisiana,
You take them.
you take them down, they go fishing, and you cook. They will remember that for the rest of their lives.
Yeah,
And
you fill an ice chest.
This
Right.
this mysticism of coastal Louisiana, the rest of the world looks at us and says, this is a really, really special place.
We had some people from Washington come down, and my grandmother got her to make her jambalaya. 'Cause, man, there's no better. And just tasting that, you tasted the Moors, you tasted South Louisiana, and you tasted my French-speaking grandmother.
So you all here around the table and others that you have worked with, I mean, you know it, you love it, love South Louisiana, I do too, from here. But, we need to make people beyond just us and those who eat your grandmother's jambalaya really, really understand the need to preserve coastal Louisiana, to save coastal Louisiana, to understand the real problem that we are facing here, but the rest of the nation does too. A group that I think we should mention who tried to put that message out there is America's Wetland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, America's Wetland was an interesting group. They were funded initially by Shell Oil. I mean, before that time, everybody who worked on coastal issues said, we've got to make people realize how relevant this area is nationally.
Right.
And so Shell put some money up, and they hired a PR firm that immediately went around and talked to everybody and got the story together. And then they mostly focused on Washington, D.C., because that's where the change happens. But they were also very active down here with organizations that spun off of them, like Women of the Storm, and what are some of the others? All of a sudden, I've lost them.
Yeah.
Well, the one that had all the characters that marched in the parade.
That was part of South America's Wetland.
But anyway, they
Estuarians.
Yeah. But they spun off a whole lot of things like that immediately started talking about this being not just the coast of Louisiana, but they continually called it the working coast of America, and things like that started to tag what it really does. And they were very, very successful for a lot of years, and then it kind of petered out. And I think they were having some issues, and they just decided that we've done our job. We've done exactly what we needed to do.
Raise awareness.
Yeah, raise awareness. But the thing is that the way you answer these things, and they did a pretty good job of that, as everybody at this table has done. But if you're going to convince people that something's important, you got to tell them not just one reason. No. You got to tell them. What I do all the time is I talk about the ecology of the area and how important that is, and everything associated with it, the cultures that we adore in our area, that we all live here, and it's evolved in this sort of thing. And then economics. It's all tied to economics. And if you put those three things together, and then if you reach out and bring in something we mentioned in the first show, TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, and go out and talk to the old boogs that have grown up in this area for decades and decades, and bring their knowledge to the table and pay tribute to it, now you can start to get an audience. And I think that's what we've done pretty well.
Bob, haven't we talked about, in the past we talked about the way that you change a generational thinking is if kids are educated from the very beginning about the importance of coastal Louisiana. And I think we've begun to do that in our schools. I know in Lafourche and Terrebonne that that's a really high emphasis.
Well, Barataria-Terrebonne, remember
did that. That's
all
exactly
of the documentaries we did, the children's...
That's exactly right.
They have a great educational program.
And the guys from Texaco at the end of Barataria-Terrebonne, you know, that was when I said of all the things we did with Barataria-Terrebonne National Estuary Program, with everything that's in the comprehensive plan, what is the one thing that you think is going to be most transformational? And they said, it is the education components, because we know if you start a kid in kindergarten and first grade and you have a curriculum where you're talking about the value, you're going to snap your fingers, you know, and in 12 years that kid's going to be voting.
That's right.
Okay? And so if it's ingrained in you that this is really important, not even if I don't live here, the dollars and cents for Louisiana, this is vitally important.
Yeah.
Okay, and if everybody understood that from the time you were a kid, and even if you're in North, remember the programs that they'd had for the kids from North Louisiana, marsh maneuvers, 4-H. You could come from North Louisiana, you could spend a week in the marshes of coastal Louisiana, and we'd take our kids from Lafourche and we'd send them to the Piney Woods because they'd never seen that. Okay, so they got the exchange.
Well, with Estuary, I mean the Sea Grant program, we're part of the Extension Service.
Right.
We would go to Camp Grant Walker every year and talk about the issue.
Yep.
But one of the things, the critical thing, other Americans, it's critical for America, and we have to say it. I tell them this, you know, we spend billions for the Everglades, okay? A farmer in Iowa who never visits the Everglades probably gets very little benefit. But that same farmer that doesn't visit the wetlands in South Louisiana, the price of his fuel, the price of the fuel, his fried chicken, okay, the
Menhaden and
Menhaden industry,
Right.
you know, all of those things are based on and the goods that come up the river. There was a story about St. Louis, maybe 10,000. What was it? There was an economic unit that was coming out of St. Louis. And when Eads finally got the opening set up, that big ships go in, it increased by tenfold, and that's continued. And that's what you sell, you know, and also the fuel, the price of your fuel. You know, it's all based on South Louisiana.
Well, let me ask you this, and you brought this up earlier, Windell, is, you know, in selling it and making the public aware of what this issue is and what it means to them, we have to give them good information, reliable, trustworthy information. Is technology helping us do that?
Well, again, we talked about GPS.
Yeah.
It helps everybody know more about what's going on, and the professionals that have to actually do the work. Anytime you get better understanding of what the truth is, a truer truth, you know, that we don't know everything about anything. We don't know it to a certain level. So there's always that extra bit of information to understand, and we need to keep on pounding it, and talking about the truth of what's going on. But we have something that we cannot win. You know, we're never going to get back the marsh. We used to do a restoration program.
Right.
It's no longer a restoration program. It's trying to hang on to what's left and maximizing it. And even if we're going to lose some of this stuff, it's kind of like getting older. You know, you might not be able to do all the stuff you could do when you were younger, but you still can do important stuff. And that's how I look at our marsh issue. You know, people get discouraged. We can't do this. We can't. No, do what you can because it's good. Yeah. And more of it, the better it's going to be. But like flood protection, one of the issues, marsh doesn't make a big difference. But when you have a treed wetland, that's when you really start making a difference. So we do, but marsh, aside from any flood protection, having marsh there is critical for just the lifestyle that we have and us being who we are. And just if it doesn't directly knock down a storm surge, I've always used it to put on the edge of the levee, on the edge of a road. Why not go make a marsh instead of putting hard structures in or putting rocks? You put in marsh that's beneficial, and you can get some protection, and you got your fisheries working again, and the place we like to visit. That's a thing that early memories of as a kid, you go fishing in the bayou with your grandpa. And then I remember sitting at my grandpa's knee, and we had Guidry Oyster House just down the road. And they told me that my mom and my grandma were the two best customers. But I can remember sitting with my grandpa, I'm 5 years old, and he's cracking the oysters to cook later, but he always eat a couple and pass a couple to me. And it's going on Grand Isle. The family would go down and you'd catch crabs along the way, right? And then you'd get to Grand Isle and kind of fish in the surf. And I remember my uncle and I, we stopped at Dufresne's Bakery. Everybody from Texas to Oklahoma, you Dufresne's Bakery. You get your hot French bread at 4 in the morning, and you're going down. I'm with my uncle, and so we make a sandwich, and we get to the beach at Grand Isle, and there's a little drizzle. Sun's kind of coming up, but the clouds are covering it, and we catch about 4 trout, and we cook them right there. Got enough dry wood, cooks it there. I can still taste that trout.
I bet you
from
can.
that. Yeah.
I can almost taste it. Yeah, the way you're describing it right now.
Taste of the coast.
Yeah.
exactly.
And that's why we love it so much, and that's why we love it so much.
Back to the educational component, I think that educating the young, and I know I worked with the BTNEP to build a project down near the boat launch at Fouchon, and it was one of the largest community-based projects ever built. We used some money from litigation where some of the property down there had been destroyed in oil and gas operations. We put it up as seed money. We then got a NOAA grant. We got America Estuaries grant. We got Chevron to put up money and hats and T-shirts. We got food donated. We got the port went out, and they actually did the heavy lifting work to build the shoreline along the area, and then we used the money and we pumped in 100,000 cubic yards of material from the canal right there that was on our property. And then we did a community event where we invited people, and people came and helped us plant it. And we had for over 5 or 6 days, we planted just thousands of plants in there. And I have to say that piece of property, I flew over it after Katrina. Everything else was devastated. It was a little higher.
Oh, yeah.
It was a little higher, and it had so much vegetation on it, and it's still there.
It's kind of funny to me.
50 acres, 50 acres.
Wow.
And that community engagement is so very important.
Yeah.
Certainly that.
But, look, the thing is that we talked about this natives, but there have been tons of people from all over the place. ConocoPhillips, over the last 10 years, have worked with us with environmental projects all over the South Lafourche area. So you have people that have jumped
I know
in
Shell
and
works
been
very
helpful.
closely too with groups too and plantings and stuff.
Well, you
like
remember
that.
the old days of Mr. John Woodard and everybody else
Yep.
who was in with Phenolater and everybody else. Who
Yeah.
was,
They were the best.
They were the ones that were focused on that because it was their property that were losing. And Windell, I'm just going to say that it's not lost on me that that the people that drove stuff that happened in coastal Louisiana, starting with Ted Falgout, who became the port director, you with the Levee District, and Jerome Zerang, they were all fisheries biologists. Okay?
Yeah.
They were all fisheries agents. So you guys were in the crux of it.
The
but then
paddle
you
down
did
by
other stuff.
Lafourche. That was we talked about.
That's right.
It was
Right.
me
That's
and
right.
Melanie Boulay that
Right.
came up with the idea.
Yeah.
And that's a fun event. The paddle
That's a
down by
great
Loyola.
event.
Yeah.
That really is.
That's held what, in the fall or the spring? I can't remember.
I don't remember.
I think it's in the spring. Anyway,
But-
with
but-
Barataria-Terrebonne
Right,
National
right,
Estuary
right,
Program.
But those
It's a
are the
fun
things.
event.
You never look at the bayou from the inside. You drive along the bayou and you think
right.
it's a certain way. You get in the bayou and you see trees and you don't even notice the road in some places. So perspective is so important with these things that you don't even.
Well, and because the thing you mentioned before, when you do that, and then you realize these people's backyards, if you were to raise the elevation, 5 feet, and that now their backyards are, you can understand why those people, there was this real negative pushback. Is it 1,000 CFS or is it 2,000 or 5,000?
Yeah.
And I remember a person that said, we're going to build it so much that we can now have navigation on Bay Lafourche again. And you can imagine if you live there, you would say, no, time out, that's not what I want. So again, it goes back to conveying information that's truthful, honest, and
Yeah.
not just this
Look,
other
people
stuff.
love the ideas, but you got to get to, when you start to build something, somebody's going to be on the negative side.
Right.
So you really got to go look at the details, make everybody understand the benefits that you get, and then minimize the problems that you cause. There's nothing that we build on this green planet that doesn't cause a problem for somebody. So don't ignore it, especially in a democracy. You respect everybody's rights. So respect it and deal with it. We don't do a good job of that.
Okay, and we're going to wrap up this conversation right now, and so I just want some final thoughts from you guys. Basically, in this conversation, talking to the public, whomever is listening or watching us right now, what do you want them to become aware of? What's your message to them? Go first with you.
My message would be that the property that I managed for years, the Caminada Headlands project, Headlands area, the project was built, the restoration project funded by BP was built and I started working on it in 2004. They started construction after I left in about 2014, 13 or 14. It was completed, and it's gone. They had hoped that it would last 10 years. It lasted maybe 6. Projects like that on a barrier shoreline, it's like a highway. You can't just build it once and leave it be. It's got to be renourished and renourished and renourished. And the importance of that particular shoreline is the barrier islands and the barrier shorelines are our first line of defense. That shoreline it could collapse. And if it collapses, it is actually 55 miles due south of the city of New Orleans.
Wow.
And you know what's between it? Not
Nothing.
much.
That's the
Broken marsh.
that was the marsh that used to be there.
Yeah.
It's no longer there.
Right.
So
that is what my message would be, is that ongoing nourishment of our barrier shorelines, it's got to happen.
It's continual.
Yeah.
It's continual now. All right, let's go to you, Wynn.
Just stay educated on what is going on, what can happen. Look, systemic programs, which is basically getting the water and the sediments to do what they can. We need to work at that. The other things that understand whatever we build, it will have to be maintained or you leave it. And we have to make some hard decisions on what we can afford. Can we afford to spend $1 million here and know it's not going to last more than 10 years? And maybe there's some places we need to do that, and some places we don't. We don't do that enough. I would love for the state to go back and relook at all of the projects that they've built, how much money we spent, and how much is left, so that we can know. I'm almost thinking we got to give up on the barrier islands and retreat to where the marsh line is, some 30 miles inland, and maybe we can maintain that at a better cost. But we don't talk about these things, and that's what I would keep on asking the question and trying to get the best solution, and knowing that nothing is forever, but is it worth it, and make that decision to do it.
Bob?
Yeah. Well, I think people in South Louisiana know about this now, and even people in North Louisiana, which I think you mentioned earlier, are aware of what we need to do. And I think we've been using our resources well. Our planning is very well done. Everybody's on the game, but at some point we've got to take this to the national level, because we can't do this alone. And this is not South Louisiana. It's valuable to us. It's where we live. It's everything about our culture and everything else. But the reality is it's vital to the success of the United States of America, because of all the shipping and all the resources that are here, oil and gas and all the energy of every type. But Kevin McCaffrey and I are doing a video on the values of Louisiana to the nation. And we were up at Lake Itasca a couple of years ago filming. And we were there for 2 days, and about 200 people, just Americans on vacation, would come by. And they'd always ask us what we were doing, and so we would talk to them about coastal Louisiana's land loss and erosion. And of about 200 people, 2 people were aware of it. The rest of them went, "What?
Really?
I've never
That's
heard that
astonishing.
before."
Yeah.
See, we think everybody knows about it because we talk about it all the time. But the 2 guys that knew about it didn't count, because they were from Jennings, Louisiana, riding motorcycles.
Yeah.
So they, they were from the land of the lost.
Yeah.
But I think we need to figure out a way. And I'm not saying take our eye off the ball and not work on local people, because the local people have got to be 100% bought in. But then at some point, we're going to have to figure out a way to take it to the national level because the nation starts to understand the investment in Louisiana for the rest of everybody else. We all depend on one another.
Indeed, we do.
Yeah, and so my perspective is, I kind of think that everything you said is true. What I'm most concerned about, though, is our citizens. Are we going to be able to stay in coastal Louisiana? And so what Windell said, it might be time to draw that line in the sand and say, we can protect above this, we can't protect below it. And what do we do about things like insurance rates and that kind of thing? Once we all move, from coastal Louisiana because we can't afford to live here, the priority of coastal Louisiana will go away.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
So we got to figure out how we fix that insurance and how we keep our people in place in coastal Louisiana.
Yeah.
All right, guys, thanks so much. Thanks for all the work that you all have done over the years and continue to do, and for this great conversation, and I hope people have learned a lot from it. I want to thank you guys for joining us. This is the second episode of our Early Warnings podcast, and coming up next, how citizens groups came together to found nonprofit organizations dedicated to restoring the Louisiana coast, and the work that they continue to do to combat coastal loss and protect our environment too. And certainly we hope that you will join us for that. Thanks for watching. You can find all episodes of Early Warnings on WYES YouTube and other sites where you get your podcasts. Go to WYES.org for more information.
All of the views and opinions expressed by the participants in this program are solely their current opinion and do not reflect those of WYES or its affiliated associations.